The images are dramatic. In Clearwater Beach, Florida, it's a photo of a black police officer carrying an elderly white woman through the water. Another photo of an Hispanic firefighter rescuing a Korean family from their flooded home. People of every race and language helping neighbors whose homes were destroyed by the August hurricane. In the days following the arrival of Hurricane Idalia, we started to see these images. And we saw similar images of rescue efforts in Hawaii after the devastating fires. These pictures were hard to see because of the human suffering, but for many of us, these images were also a source of hope. For a moment, at least, we did not have to focus on arguments about school curriculum policies or to listen to shouts of people from the extreme opposites of the political landscape. For a moment, we saw Americans being Americans. We saw humans being human. And don't get me wrong, hurricanes don't give us an excuse not to confront important issues. We do indeed have many things to deal with as a nation. But many of us looked at the photos from Florida, and on one level we were relieved, because in the aftermath of a natural disaster, the things that divide us could be put into a proper perspective. In the hours and days after the Florida hurricane, people of every race, language, and way of life helped their neighbors of every race, language, and way of life. Everybody faced a common challenge, and everyone worked toward a common goal, making sure that the other human beings around them were safe and taken care of. In moments like this, it seems we acknowledge something that we should never forget, that we're all part of the human family and that every human being has dignity and value. At the end of today's gospel, Jesus reminds us that wherever human beings are, He is there in our midst. He is there wherever 2 or 3 people are gathered in His name, because He is present in every human being. Every human being created in God's image, and their life is God's precious gift. We remember that, at least in moments like this. Neighbors just help neighbors. And those of us who live a little further away also have an instinct to help, don't we? I don't live in Florida or Hawaii, but my church community has worked to raise charitable donations which can be sent to both of those states. And when I make a donation in moments like this, it's my way of saying, on a very personal level, to every resident of Florida, black or white, Hispanic, African American, Asian, liberal, conservative, gay or straight, you're my brother. You are my sister. And the Christ who lives in me is the Christ who lives in you. And if I have any means to help, I must help. This is what love requires. I see Christ in you, and I treat you with that dignity. So far, so good? But there is more to today's gospel than just an encouragement to respect and love hurricane victims in another state. In fact, respecting and loving hurricane victims 1,000 miles away from here often feels easy. Write the check, tell yourself you've helped, then go home and do a Zoom meeting. But in today's gospel, Jesus asks, actually, He demands, that we not limit our respect and love to people 1,000 miles away. Jesus asks and demands that we respect and love the people right in front of us, even the people with whom we disagree, even the ones who may have done something that has hurt us or angered us. And this is where it gets harder. Because Jesus says, if your sister or brother sins against you, if they've done something that's hurt you, confused you, harmed you, here is how a Christian handles it. Yes, if your neighbor sins against you, has said or done something which leaves you shaking your head, here is how a Christian responds. Go and talk with them. When something has happened between you and someone else, when something difficult has arisen, go and talk with them. Do not talk about them to everybody else. Frankly, I think this is one of Jesus' most ignored teachings, and we ignore it at the risk of our souls. And I think it's ignored because, at least in my experience, it can just be so hard at times. When someone hurts me or does something with which I disagree, Jesus demands that I go and speak with them. It's easy to love a hurricane victim 1,000 miles away, but Jesus also calls me to love the person near me who just made a decision with which I disagree. It's easy for me to say, well, isn't it nice that all the different people in Clearwater, Florida are loving each other right now? But what happens when the person right next to me says or does something that I don't approve of, or even which hurts me? You see, that's when the moment, that is the moment when the gospel demands that the Christ in me must honor the Christ in them. The Jesus who loves that other person wants you and me to love that other person. And that love is expressed in the concrete way that we respect their dignity as a child of God and speak with them. The instructions of Jesus in this gospel passage are clear. If someone sins against you, hurts you, does something that causes you pain, the first step that Jesus describes is this: go and speak with them about it, alone, one-on-one. And if that doesn't work, try again. And if that doesn't bring resolution, then take someone with you to talk together. And if that doesn't bring resolution, then ask for the help of the church. And only after all of that has failed somehow, then Jesus says, well, you can treat them like a Gentile or a tax collector. But before you assume that this means that you can dismiss them or cancel them or post an angry message about them on Facebook, just remember this. This is Matthew's gospel. And what job did Matthew have? He was a tax collector. And how did Jesus treat the tax collector? Well, he made him an apostle, and he loved him. These instructions from Jesus are clear. They sound so simple when he speaks them. But the behavior described in this gospel passage runs counter to what we're often told to do by the culture in which we live. Even people who call themselves faithful Christians ignore this teaching of Jesus on quite a regular basis. You might be wondering, well, how is that? How do we do that? How do we ignore Jesus' teaching here? Well, let me give you an example. I get an email from someone, and I'm upset by what they say in that email. So instead of calling the person and asking to speak directly with them, I forward that upsetting email to 7 other friends with a comment at the top, "Can you believe she said this?" Or A member of your family says or does something at a Labor Day gathering that hurts you in some way. And instead of speaking with them about it, you go on social media and post angry words for all to see. Or your boss makes a decision with which you disagree. In fact, you think it's a hurtful decision. But instead of going to speak directly with your boss, you spend the next month tearing them down in the conversation at the coffee machine. Or your former spouse hurts you deeply somehow, and instead of speaking with them about it, you take every opportunity to speak ill of them in front of your children. Or your pastor says something that you don't like. You don't speak with him or her, seeking deeper understanding together. Instead, you send out a tweet calling your pastor a heretic. Your neighbor, whose skin color is different than yours, says something at a dinner party that gets you mad. So you go home and rant to your spouse. But what was it that Jesus says? Go and talk with them. Jesus doesn't provide much wiggle room here. I frankly wish he did, because I know in my own life that this is not an easy teaching. And I know in my own life that I don't always carry it out perfectly. Still, aren't we inspired when we see people, very different people, working together, speaking together, striving together to help each other, to come to understand each other, perhaps even after a storm? But it's harder to work together, to respect each other, to speak together when the person you're struggling with has a face and a name and is right in front of you. Loving neighbors from a distance can be easy. Loving a neighbor who's hurt you can be much harder. Loving those with whom we disagree, well, that's a hard gospel task. I suspect that Jesus knew that his disciples would hear these words and wonder, is this really possible? Can we actually do what Jesus is asking? Can we do it? Can we do it? Not if we rely simply on our own strength, our own wisdom, or our own ways. Maybe that's why Jesus includes this thoroughly encouraging sentence in the midst of this challenging teaching. Jesus says, "If two of you agree on earth about anything for which you are to pray, it shall be granted to them by my heavenly Father." Jesus never asks us to do anything alone or in isolation. He reminds us that the kind of healing, honest conversations that he's describing will only be possible if we root those conversations in prayer and pray for each other. I myself can't do what Jesus asks in today's gospel. But he's not asking me to do it by myself. He's reminding me that he can do it in me, and he can do it through me, and it all starts with prayer. He shows us the way. He teaches us how. And in his word and sacrament, he gives us the grace and strength we need to begin.